Okay, we're good.
I had that, all right?
All right. Good evening, everybody. All right. Welcome back. What'd you do? Oh, that's all right. All right. Thank you all for being here tonight. Continuing our, God, I don't know how long it's going to be or where we're going to get to at some point. This Bible study, this study is going to be whatever it is. Whatever it ends up to be, it is what it is. I have no idea. Right now, we're talking about the Middle Ages. So that'll be we're getting into a little bit tonight, and very little bit. So thank you everybody online for joining us. Gluttons for punishment up there. My man, show them what they're missing out on. Okay, so this is lemon sponge pie with strawberry compote on top. Now the picture you're seeing is from last week. I don't know why I updated it. So just imagine this really awesome looking custard pie with the strawberry topping. And it's gone. Actually, imagine it's gone because everybody's already done with it. All right, there we go. It's delicious. It was just stupid delicious. I mean, All right, so before we get into this, just going to take a little step back. And we're going to briefly summarize kind of where we get into, and I might kind of hammer this home every time, or at least some degree, because the whole point of, like I said when originally this was going to be looking at the Book of Concord, and the Reformation documents. But to understand what's going on there, you really had to understand what's going on in the Reformation, what they're talking about. Understand what's going on in the Reformation, you had to understand what's going on in the church at large. And if you want to understand what was going on in the church at large, you have to understand how it got to that point. And so I had to back it up. And hopefully, what you're all beginning to kind of see is that, nothing's easy with the life of the church, ministry, anything. That from the point Jesus ascends into heaven and leaves us on our own to make a mess of things, that's pretty much what we do. But the whole history of the church is not clean. It's messy at times, but there were sometimes good reasons for why we did the things we did, sometimes bad reasons, sometimes there were things that we tried because we were responding to something, but we didn't understand how it would have consequences like they did. So it's just, there was a lot of things going on. And especially when we're talking about the Middle Ages tonight, which, my God, we can probably do months and months just on what's going on in the Middle Ages. So we're scratching this much of the surface with the Middle Ages. But hopefully it's going to at least give you kind of an idea that it's just not so simple. Whenever you watch a movie about the Middle Ages or any time and the church is involved, a church through the medieval period or anything, it's always caricatures of like, oh, here's the evil church hierarchy and the guys on the top and then the guys on the bottom are like the little heroes, or maybe they're not. Maybe the church as a whole is the evil villain of the scenario and they're in charge of all things. It's like it wasn't that. I mean, maybe in some places it sometimes could have been close to that, but there was such a wide variety of things going on. And there's just no way you can kind of just generalize things. Just like, if you were to say, like, if I was to ask you, explain to me how Christianity in America works today. Give me one explanation of how Christians think and believe and act in America. Could you do it? Positive, negative, anything. Well, what does that mean? I mean, seriously. Okay, even that, because the Mormons would still fall into that.
Back then.
Yeah, it's never simple. It's always, there's so much you gotta unpack.
Would it be safe to say back then, not a whole lot of people knew about Jesus?
Oh, no.
It's not like you seen the Northern Lights or something the other day.
No. People, Christianity was, it was I mean, Christianity was probably more known back then, honestly, than it might be today. I mean, I don't know how serious I would make that comment, but I don't know.
All the movies back then, they were all Christians.
And a lot of it is, a lot of even how we regard what happened back then is colored by our biases. Good Lord, when we get into the Reformation, most of what we are coming into the Reformation thinking is heavily influenced because we're Lutheran, and is going to shade a lot of that, right and wrong. Okay, the best, the most wonderful thing when we finally get to the Reformation is when we unpack the 99 Theses, right? That's Luther's big moment, right? This is big. He nailed it onto the, and these are his 99 Theses. This was his big, middle finger to the Pope and all that, and he's like, this is his big moment. Was absolutely not that at all. He wasn't against Catholicism. That he wasn't even really fully into his hey, let's reform things. He was like, hey, there's some things that aren't quite right. Let's talk about them. He was very Catholic.
He was just posting a seminar notice.
Yeah.
Like Michigan State.
Yeah, if I in Oklahoma, every Reformation Day, I always wanted to go to the Catholic Church and stick a thing on their door, just to be fun. But I mean, yeah, it would be like if I went to the campus, the student center at MSU, and I put a little thing on there saying, hey, come to Ascension, and I'm going to talk about why I think X, Y, and Z might not be correct, and maybe some ways that we can look at it. Now, based on kind of what happens, there's a lot of things in context and situations that caused it to be bigger than that and started some stuff. But we'll get to it. Matt Meyerhuber jumping in with the good questions. He says, about all the dirty, messy history, how do we reconcile that with Jesus' promise that he would be with us always to the end of the age, that the Spirit would lead us into all truth? Because you're watching this Bible study. Honestly, the fact that the gospel is still proclaimed, with all of our denominational picadillos and whatever, the fact that the church has not been overcome, even with various abuses, even with various misunderstandings, even with all this stuff, the foundation is always going to be there. And even honestly, even if we look out and the church in America crumbles to the ground, the church being just like church bodies, whatever, fall apart, it still doesn't change the fact that Christ still is with us to the very end of the age. That'll never change. And honestly, when we have to deal with this stuff, that's the Holy Spirit working. And I kind of jokingly said, we're in this Bible study. It's like, well, yeah, we take Scripture and we say, we're looking at what happened, and we can look at it and say, well, this is why, where they got it from Scripture, and this is why maybe it didn't quite work out. This is where they were looking at it, and trying to kind of navigate our way through. But, yes, don't worry, Matt. Jesus is still with us. I know he's not worried. All right, so we started with kind of the time of the apostles. The time of the apostles was when the church, is born kind of on Pentecost, and it starts to grow. Gentiles and Jews are coming in, not without its problems. I mean, there was no golden age of the church. We have letters from Paul clearly outlining just how messed up things got real quick. That they were trying to bring both Jews and Gentiles together under this gospel. And the Jews had their baggage, the Gentiles had their baggage. Trying to reconcile all that, it was hard. So the early church, we had growth, the Spirit's working, and we're screwing up. But, the apostles they're just trying to get kind of the framework down and, just get an understanding, people. This is how, for the Jews, this is where Jesus is the fulfillment of all this stuff. For the Gentiles, this is why Jesus is the only fulfillment of all this stuff. Then we move into the early church. So the first, post the apostles, we're talking about the first couple, 200-300 years. What we're calling the early church. This is where church is growing more and more. Christians are kind of distinguished by their behavior, by their life. Christianity is kind of an oddity in the surrounding world. Christians don't think the way others think. Christians don't behave the way other people's behave. It's very unique. It's very like, weird. Something about you guys, which led to a lot of interest, but also led to persecution, a lot of scapegoating. So persecution is on the rise here. You've got, as the church grows and spreads, you've got these congregations popping up. They're mostly autonomous. They're doing their own thing, which starts to lead into issues where all of a sudden you've got all these congregations. Well, now they're starting to realize, hey, we might need some oversight. We might need some central authority here. If we have differences of opinion, either of practice or doctrine, we need some authority to be able to intercede. So, this is where different areas kind of gain in prominence. This is why the church in Rome is kind of, they have a good history. They've got a good apostolic history. A lot of good stuff was done in Rome. So over time, Rome is kind of shaping up as like, everybody knows, like, well, you can deal with it. Like, I can go to some of the churches in East Lansing. We can talk. But you know what? If we can't hammer that out, well, maybe we go to the church, the Holy Land in Ann Arbor where the district office is, and we can have them deal with it. But, if we really had a problem, then we take it to Rome. Not that they're, not in the sense that anybody was thinking like God said, ooh, Rome. But just that it's like, you know what? We all agree this is working out pretty well. They got their stuff together. In the East, you've got Constantinople, which is shaping up. In the East, you have a lot of big cities and a lot of centers where you've got a large Christian presence. So Alexandria, Constantinople, Antioch. So you've got centers where you can go, and they're kind of coalescing in the East. Meanwhile, in the West, it's mainly Rome is the center. All right.
You mean Lutherans?
Oh, no.
Or what do you mean?
We're not getting into Lutherans yet. We're talking about like 300 AD.
Oh.
We're still about 1,200 years away from Lutherans at this point. This is way back, way back. So then,
something that's a little surprising about all this, when you look at our society, people break away from each other.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to come together under one rule, which is kind of what you're saying.
Sometimes, yeah. But even when we break away, we still coalesce under, because if we're in a district, we're in a national synod, well, international, I guess. But if we could, as a whole, break away from the synod and be just a Michigan area, and then we could break out of that, but we'd still have our own. We'd want an authority here, so we would always kind of coalesce around something.
Well, I guess what I'm saying, people tend to want to be right. So
Absolutely.
So I don't think this church is right, so I think this is what it should be. Then they start a new church over here.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, and that's that. I mean, I don't know how much of that is American specific. We do have our own issues just with individuality and wanting to do our own thing. That definitely fuels that.
So you're saying that it wasn't going on back then?
I'm not saying it wasn't, but and I don't honestly. I don't even think I've read anything to the effect that was kind of the case. I mean, what you would really have is what you see happening is like, so if a heresy starts to kind of take root in a place, there's argument. They're arguing together. But there was no kind of denominational breakage. There was no denomination. It was just a Christian church. So there was definitely arguments. There were definitely conflicts. But there wasn't like the kind of breaking apart that we see, like what we'd see today. Not early on. They might pull pull apart and be just like, you know what, just leave us alone. You do your thing. We're all still, we'll get together in the council and yell at each other. But as time goes on, you do start to see breaks, and so you get like the schism between the East and the West, where you get Roman Catholicism and the Eastern Orthodoxy, where that was like probably the first big major, we're taking our ball and going and leaving, boom. And so that happens, and that's huge. I mean, that is a landmark thing in the church, that things got so bad that the church had to split like that.
Yeah, I'd see that as more the norm.
Unfortunately, it's become that.
Yeah.
It shouldn't
that's
be.
because I'm part of this society.
Well, I think we see it acutely more, partially because we're American individuals. We'll do our own thing. You can't tell me what to do or what to think. I'll do my own thing. So I think it makes it worse. The Reformation, for all that we would say, like the Reformation was good and necessary, I mean, the downside is, when do we see a lot of the huge, like all of a sudden, all this denominational explosion? Well, the Reformation kind of spurs that on, where you're going from basically two main Orthodox, don't quote me too much on that, bodies, and then the Reformation happens, and all of a sudden it's like, psh, it's like a piece of glass that shatters.
It's kind of like saying, look, the church wasn't right. I mean,
which is why, like, Luther wanted to reform it.
Yeah.
He didn't want to splinter it. He wanted to reform, but he got excommunicated. So what are you going to do? And to be fair, Luther, in his mindset, and a lot of the Lutheran reformers, the mindset was, we're not creating a new church. We're a continuation of evangelical, properly understood, Christianity. Evangelical just being the gospel. You have other church bodies that are like, you know what? Nope, we're out. We're going to throw out everything Catholic. If it looks Catholic, smells Catholic, whatever, we're done with it, and we're doing our own thing. And so there was the Reformation, then we got the Radical Reformation, where things just go, Yah! And Luther is like, no, guys. So it did kind of just, once that door was open, people were just like, wow, like, I didn't know we could do that. Sweet. So that, which, jumping ahead quite a bit, that's, a good way for us who are usually very much, yes, Luther, rah, 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 Reformation, yeah. Like, well, it was good and bad. It had, as a church, for the church as a whole, we'd say it was good because from our perspective, we preserved the gospel, we're getting back to, we're getting rid of all those abuses. But it brought in a lot of unintended consequences. And if we don't look too, if we're not critical, taking a critical look at what we do or where we've come from, we might too easily overlook, is the LCMS perfect? If anyone from Synod is watching, yes. I mean, it's not. We're all here because we think it's the closest to right as opposed to other denominations. I mean, that's why I'm an LCMS Lutheran. I think that our doctrine is, for all of its, pros, cons, whatever, is the closest reasonably, theologically, rationally, every way, closest to what I think is what Scripture is proclaiming. I mean, if you didn't, you wouldn't be here. If you thought a Baptist theology was closer to it, then I would expect you to go to a Baptist church. So do I think we have better theology than Baptists and Presbyterians and Catholics? Like, absolutely. 100%. But I say we don't have it completely. We're not perfect. There are problems, things that we can't necessarily work out. There's tensions that we have to live with. And that just has to do with us being sinful human beings that, we screw up. And if you've ever spent any time in LCMS churches, you know that, hey, whoever's up there, maybe good, maybe bad, maybe somewhere in the middle. I don't know. We'll talk about that later. We'll do anyway. So that was up through like maybe 200, 300, 400, first couple hundred years. So then we get into the period before this, which was 300 to about 300 to 600 AD. So this is where Christianity goes mainstream. Okay, Constantine converts to Christianity, and now all of a sudden it's legal, no more persecution, awesome. So now we see rapid expansion. So now Christianity has hit the big times. It's supported by the state. You know, the state is supporting Christianity, awesome. There are perks to being a Christian now. There are perks to becoming clergy. It's awesome. It means it's just blowing up. Unfortunately, along with that, you have a lot of outside influence that now creeps in. Because what was kind of an oddity before that people would like, well, let me find out more about it. Let me see what it's all about. And okay, more like a teaching kind of situation. It's now like, wait, the king's Christian now? Well, I guess we're Christian. Okay, what does that mean? I don't know. But I know if I send you to seminary, we get a tax break. All right. Situations like that come up where it's like, okay, well. So lines between church and state start to blur. This is going to be an issue. You know, there's a reason why Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. You know, what was the big deal when Jesus was saying, like, everybody wanted him to come be their king, to overthrow Rome? Did Jesus do any of that? In fact, he seems to say, that's not why I'm here. So you have, by 300-400 AD, so, you know, a few hundred years after Christ, now the church is like, hey, let's take over the world. Like, well, not in the way you think. But that's just kind of what happens. So the church and state kind of come together. Expansion is going on. Now you've got the east-west division is growing. We talked about it a little bit. There's splits starting to happen already. And so there's already to be this division between the two. So the Middle Ages that we're talking about is roughly 600 to 1400, this time period. Obviously, a lot happens in 800 years. A lot going on. We're basically just going to talk about some of the Christian church stuff. But you got to figure, was it 622? Does anybody know what happens? What big, huge, world-changing thing happens here? Essentially, even though it's not technically the birth, Islam. 622 is when Muhammad is expelled from Mecca and sets up shop in Medina, okay? Establishing kind of the first Muslim community, burgeoning empire, whatever. So on top of everything that the church is dealing with, just growing pains, situations, dealing with how they're in bed with the state in a lot of cases now, the change from the Roman Empire falling to a feudal society, to whatever that means, to going from a feudal society to a capitalist society. You've got all this, and you've got this new religion that is going to be taking the world by storm and is going to conquer huge portions. And so you've got barbarians, like before the Muslims were a thing, the barbarians were coming through and like, oh God, what are we doing with these guys? Well, now Islam rises up and we have this. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. But, you know, Islam spread rapidly, just really rapidly.
What was so compelling about Islam?
Well, you know, it was, honestly, compared to, not to put just simplify it too much, it was a lot simpler. You know, you look at, especially at that time, you know, we've had centuries of Christianity where we've had to have councils, arguments about what the Trinity means and how you have to understand this, and there's heresies and all this other stuff. Islam was very simple. It was like, no, this is what it is. You submit, you do these things, you have the 5 pillars, you do these prayers. At this point, you know, you do this, bump, 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 you do this, you do that, you're good. Very, I mean, it's legalistic. You know, just like, any kind of, you look at Old Covenant Judaism, the law, right? Do the law. Islam, in comparison, was very simple. And actually, that you bring that up is interesting because you've got, so the rise of Islam. So 622 is when it kind of starts. By just the beginning of the 700s, so less than 100 years, almost all of North Africa is captured. Damascus, Jerusalem, Alexandria, all these have been captured. It's just huge, blows up like crazy. Part of it is, when the Muslims, the armies came, they were very, very well organized. They were formidable. They fought really hard and well. But here's where like our natural kind of bias instinct is say, Islam came through and conquered all these places. Not all those places considered them conquerors. Islam came in and a lot of people were like, okay. Some of the places, you had like, you had very Christian areas. Well, you know what? The farther you get away from if here's Rome and here's Constantinople, you've got churches out here. It's not like today where there was easily accessed, a lot of communication. A lot of these places were distant. They didn't have necessarily a lot of interaction. Sometimes, actually, especially in the East, not every Christian church loved Constantinople or the emperor. Because what would happen is that they would, so the emperor kind of took over a lot of decision making in the church. And a lot of what kind of fell to him. So he's looking at, so there's all this conflict within the church, doctrinal conflict, right? The emperor doesn't want to deal with that. He wants order. Remember, Rome is basically, the Roman Empire is fallen apart. It has collapsed. Barbarians, all this stuff. We need order. You guys are fighting over the freaking Trinity? All right. So he would call counselors or whatever and say look, this is it. This settles the debate. That's it. You all fall in line. Well, way down here, they're like, well, what if I don't want to? You're telling us what to do, and you don't even bother to care about what we're doing? I mean, there is some human element here where it's like, you don't care. I look at the IRS. Do they? All they want is their money at the end of the year. I'm going to say I don't owe you that much money. I don't cheat on my taxes. But I understand the impulse. So they're kind of distanced from them. And so honestly, Islam comes in to take over. A lot of times, the Muslims came in and they basically said, hey, Christians, Jews, you can still do your own thing for the most part. They set up shop and they took over, but it wasn't necessarily. A lot of times they were like, okay, we'll give you a lot of latitude. You can still kind of do what you're doing. When we think Islam, we think, Afghanistan from a few years ago, right? The Taliban. Long time ago, different, all right? So when Islam would come in and they're like, well, you know what, we're going to take over. You can still do your thing. And they're like, well, yeah, what if you get, well, you're not going to support us. You're not going to fight for us. So, okay, cool. Now, that's not everybody, but, some. Matt says here, Islam also promises really tangible rewards in heaven as compared to Christianity. Excellent point. And not to get the 70 virgins or however many you get, I don't know. But if you think about that, in our talk about heaven, and granted the resurrection is what we're after, right? But ultimately going into heaven. Scripture doesn't talk about it that much. We don't know much about heaven. There's a lot of singing. There's a lot of praise, which, given from what I observe, not just in our church, but in the church at large, half the people who get up to heaven are going to be pissed because they don't like to sing. That's just the reality, right? But so Christianity comes and be like, oh, you'll be. We can't even talk about like this is concretely how it'll be because we don't know concretely how it'll be. All we can say is we'll be in the presence of Christ for sure. It will be wonderful. There will be no more tears, no more sorrow, which I mean are great things and something I look forward to. But those are more those concepts that I can't even like. That's a thing that I can dream of, but I can't even imagine. Like I don't know what a life without tears is like. I have no clue. I mean, thinking about Caitlin going off to school, and how she's going to be gone next year, and it's like I don't know what it's like to not have this. So when we talk about what's in heaven, it's so very theoretical, not real theoretical, but just like abstract. Compare that with what Islam tells you. Oh, it's very sensual, and not saying sexual, but sensual pleasures, like tangible pleasures, like you get, in the case of like the virgins, whatever, it's like, okay, fine. But I mean, that's, if you're talking about pleasures of the flesh in like a good sense, you know what that's like. People understand that it's like, well, I know what it's like to have, spouse, whatever. And I get that perfectly. Sweet. I get, we can talk about feasts. We talk about that, the Feast of the Lamb. Okay. But I mean, their description of what they get is very particular and it's very like tangible. Like it's a lot more defined. So, and honestly, if you're coming into an area, like if you, as a Lutheran Christian, and then, Islam, Muslim comes over, and we're trying to tell somebody who has no idea about any of this stuff, like, tell me about heaven. I'm like, well, we're in the presence of God, and we worship, and we sing praises, and it's just a wonderful thing. He's like, let me tell you what you get to do. And it's going to be great, because you get to do this, and you get that, and that. The person is going to be like, well, the Lutheran, that sounds nice, but wow, I know what that's all about. So there is a certain amount of, it's, and like I said, it's simpler, One of the, one of the things that I've heard over the course of my ministry, what turns people off from LCMS Lutherans is how we just always nitpick about other Lutherans. Well, they don't have it right because they're, those Elka Lutherans, you don't even get me started on them, because that's a whole different denomination, and they're the liberal ones. But then it's like, well, so you went to, you visited an LCMS church. Oh, wait, which one? That one? Oh, let me tell you about that guy, because he teaches this and this, and we are so like ready to like about each other, and somebody comes to that and we're like, I don't want to deal with this crap. I would rather go to a non-denom church where, I just go, I get lost in the crowd. It's fun. It's cool. Talk about Jesus, I guess. I don't know. But it makes me feel good. And they never talk about anybody else. It's just about you and what you can get. Honestly, if I was church shopping, I'd go there. Rather than a bunch of Lutherans who are like, that's why it's like, don't tell people. It's like, let's focus on what we're for, not so much what we're against. It's like, well, somebody comes, well, what do you think about contemporary worship styles? Oh God, and I'm not going to get into a discussion. Well, the problem with that is, which is where a lot of Lutherans will go immediately. Like, well, let me tell you what's wrong with that and why this is better. I would say, you know what? We worship God in the context that fits right with us. As long as we are focused on receiving the Word of God and being forgiven, that's the whole point of worship. And if a music style is what helps, is kind of goes along with that, sweet, okay. Do you do that here? No, we're not really set up for it. Cool. Not like, well, let me tell you why. You should not be, shine Jesus shine up in church. It's just people don't like that, and I understand it because you're not giving them a compelling reason. I mean, come get pie and cake and watch this monkey dance around for an hour, you know, and then it's kind of entertaining sometimes. But it's like, that's a good plug. Like, that might actually get people in here, and they might, you know, we'll communicate something. But, you know, there's something to be said about, like, playing up the good stuff.
Might be playing heaven too.
Well, it's like your
There
verse
better
at
be.
one time said, come for Jesus, stay for
Yeah, I know, right?
or something like that.
Which, and it's not like it's a bait and switch kind of thing, but it's like we can emphasize the fact that, like, hey, you know, don't come here because we have great hospitality. Come here because we proclaim Christ. Just so you know, we have great hospitality. It doesn't hurt. You know, but here's where the Lutheran nitpicky comes in. Like, oh, well, see, all you're doing is telling people, like, you're nice people, and it doesn't tell anybody about the gospel. You're just giving pie and cake, and it's like, oh my God. Just go away and let it. And here's the thing: go away. Just let us be. Let's do our own thing.
Yeah, but we got freedom to do what we want.
Right.
But those people don't.
But see,
I mean,
that
the Muslims don't. They hand out the women
the beauty
black robe.
the beauty of the simplicity of it is that we all want boundaries. We all I mean, even the most, you know, free thing or whatever needs some sort of structure. And honestly, you know, it's for a lot of people, if you said, well, here's the Lutheran sales pitch. Okay, so your life in Christ is going to be just kind of a circular process of just going through tribulation, and then you turn to God, and you receive comfort, and then it's just back into it, and back into it, back into it. And you're going to be dealing with a lot of tensions where you're going to go through some pits and valleys, but but don't worry, Christ is there. We're there for you. It's going to be a challenge. This is a journey, and, you know, there's going to be a lot of, it's not always going to be easy. Versus, do these 5 things. Even if it's restrictive, you know what? If it's restrictive, does it get me there? And I have to do those 5 things? Cool. I mean, would you rather, like, take a 5-question multiple choice test, or have a long, where you have to write a long essay of 10 pages?
The latter.
You want to write the essay?
Yes.
Oh, I'd much rather, or, you know, just like fill out the boop, 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 done.
There's not any thinking involved in that. You can't make a mistake. It's, you know, I've known other denominations that way, where it's very, very structured.
Yeah,
And like you say, it's very easy to know where your boundaries
Right.
are and where you stay, and there's a comfort.
yeah. Oh, yeah. It's very comforting to know that there's rigid, like, you do this and you know you're good. Versus, well, yeah, because we talk about, like, well, you know, how do you know when you've lost your faith? Like, how much in sin do you have to be before you really have to start worrying? And we're like, well, you know, we're always sinners. We're all sinners. But, you know, if you get, you know, it's like, with Islam, it's hit these points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. With Christianity, we talk about, well, here's the cliff of unbelief. Do you always know exactly how close to it you are? Not always. And that's like, so you mean I might be like right here and I might not even know it? It's like, well, you might know it. You probably have some clues. But it's like there's not a lot of, but if you know that, if you do those 5.
Well, what do they do with their women? Because I've never seen the women on a rug in the churches or whatever, mosque.
Well, they separate out. Like I said, we're not going to get into it because
Okay.
that could be a world religion class.
But I was gonna say, our structure, you're talking about structure, wouldn't that be for us the 10 Commandments?
Oh, well, sure, but even in that, I mean, it's not that simple, though. Because then we go like, well, you hear it said, you shall not commit murder. I tell you. Like, and that's the thing. If it was just the commandment, like, don't murder, sweet, I don't have to murder, I'm great. But then Jesus goes and screws it all up by saying, did you ever say you fool to somebody? Are you angry? You've committed murder. And it's like, and that's where it's like, oh, this is like, there's a lot. And if you're trying to be a rule follower within that framework, it's like, well, and the thing about Christianity, that might be the easier thing. In Islam, you've got the 5 pillars. You do that, you're good. Christianity, do we have rules? Sure, we have the way God wants us to live. Can you do it?
No.
That's the problem. You can't. And at the end of the day, so if a person says, can I please God? Like, does God have an expectation on my life? And we'd say, yes. Here's how he wants you to live. Can I do it and save myself? No. Oh. Does God have an expectation? Yep. Can I do it? Yep. Oh, okay, cool. I mean, very simplistic. I mean, there's a lot more involved, but you can see how it is attractive for very structured reasons. It was attractive in contextual reasons. In that time, it was like, well, plus, I mean, you've got situations where if you've got barbarians over here who are just kind of going through scorched earth, and here comes Islam who is going to take over, but they're essentially going to leave you alone for the most part. So there's a lot of challenges in that, and so like I said, the Muslims who would come in, they would allow a certain amount of latitude in the Christians' belief and practice that the emperor might not have. The emperor might have said, no, you have to practice. Like, you cannot do, you have to cut your hair. We talked about last week. Like, all clergy have to be bald.
Thank you.
I'm getting there. And then the Muslims come in and they say, hey, we're going to take over. You can practice. And they're like, do we have to be bald, though? And they're like, I don't care. Grow your hair out. Rock it. And they're like, sweet. So it wasn't... so anyway, so you have that all kind of going on. And really, you don't get, Islam stretches all the way into like Spain and wants to go into France. But then it was, who was it? Charles Martel. Stop that. But, Islam had a prominent presence in Spain right up until 1492. And that's when Ferdinand and Isabella, won and expelled them. But you've got that all going on in the background. So there's a lot of stuff. Let's see. Moving on from there. Let's see. We talked about the monasteries a little bit. Not really going to get into it necessarily. Feudalism. So back to Christianity. So we're focusing on what Christians are dealing with, what the church is dealing with. Feudalism is just, it is the system of how the economy, how everything kind of worked. It wasn't like people back then were like, we're going to enact feudalism. Feudalism is just a word that people came up with to describe it after the fact. It was kind of a blend of this kind of a Roman sorts of ways of doing things and I think a Germanic way of doing things, where basically, it centered around kind of land ownership was a big part of it. So land ownership conferred a certain amount of status and leadership, and people kind of, you'd have people working on the land, and if you had a piece of land and you went into debt, you would basically, you could give it to a larger landowner, and they would kind of assume it, and now you would still be able to work your land, but it was their land now. So when you died, it actually went to them. So it was just kind of a system whereby everything kind of worked very simplistically off of land ownership. Vassals, lords, servants, serfs, fiefs, all this kind of stuff. Go back to 4th grade history, all whatever you can remember from that, you're fine. 1200 is kind of when feudalism ends, and this is where capitalism comes in. Yay, capitalism. We know this. So that's kind of the transition point of that. So feudalism in the church occupy this interesting kind of space because, the church had land, the churches that, you got the barbarians who come through, right? And they're taking over stuff and just kind of wrecking havoc wherever they go. One of the things that kind of survived were churches, monasteries. And when the church is growing again, monasteries are popping up and kind of creating these centers. So there were areas where church owned land, but then as feudal lords and whoever, kings, princes, whatever, they amassed land. Well, okay, they could grant land to the church. They can take land away. There was a lot of interesting interplay between these two things. So say there's a king who's converted to Christianity, or a prince of the area, lord of the area, becomes a Christian. He might confer some land to the church in that area. Well, based on this, so if the church has administration of the land, well, they need to oversee it. So it's not just their role as religious, center, but also taking care of it and the people on it. So there starts to be a lot of just weird kind of connections here, where it's like, well, what is the church doing? What's the role? And it has to play dual roles, triple roles sometimes. It's just like there's a lot of muddiness going on. Not to mention that, the church, essentially in any area, was under control of or oversight of the bishop. So maybe a bishop of East Lansing, right? Kind of oversaw the churches in this land area. Well, if this was oversaw by a lord or a king, he kind of controlled the land and kind of had some control over what happens in the church. They could appoint their own priests. A landowner might build a chapel on his land and be like, oh, see, we're spreading Christianity, but I want this priest over here. I want this bishop. Why do you think that would be? You never know what you're going to get. And maybe this bishop is going to do things the way he wants it done. And so you actually see that there were times where it's like the church wasn't always in charge of itself sometimes. There was a lot of forces, outside forces, that they had to contend with. And sometimes it was the church that was leading the way in an area. Sometimes it was the lord, the prince, the king, who was kind of influencing and leading the way. It was not cut and dry. It was very fluid, okay? So you've got a whole bunch of issues with that. And again, that church-state line is just blurred all over the place. So there's no overarching like, the church or whatever. It's like, you know what? Different areas are dealing with different stuff. They're doing whatever. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. Some are legitimate Christian leaders who want to do right things. They do it poorly. Some of them are just power-hungry dudes who are doing whatever they want. Mixed bag.
Was that going on in both the West and the East?
This is mostly going on in the West. The East, when did... I had this here somewhere. Okay, so the East is being surrounded by Islam. And so they didn't, I have some notes here. So Islam almost captured Constantinople, but they were defeated in 718. So Constantinople was holding strong. Later fell in 1453 to the Ottoman Empire. So that's when the Ottoman Empire comes in, Turkey, Constantinople falls. But at that time there was a point where, I wrote something down here. So in this period of time, so by 1050, by 1050, there were only 5 bishops in all of Africa. That is how much Islam came in and just took over. So in the East, they're dealing with all that. Now, like with the Islam thing, it was a different time. So like Christians were, it wasn't quite like it is now, where we see it, where the Christian church is very, and in certain areas it's like really oppressed. There were a lot of areas where they were like, you know what, just you do your thing. We have some rules and whatever, but by and large, they're kind of like, Christians were kind of in the East able to do their own thing within the context. But they're pretty much, East and West is like vastly different at that point. And the feudalism thing was very much heavily inspired by this Germanic Rome blend. And because it was like based on land ownership and people were kind of moving into the new areas, in the east it was already built up. You had all these huge metropolitan centers where everything was like there. Meanwhile, different tribes and whatever all throughout Western Europe are all just a patchwork. So you did have, this was just very much a Western thing.
So, what was going on in the east then, we would say that was what was making up the Eastern Orthodox history?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And they're, yeah, because they're dealing with their stuff, which is far different from what the West is dealing with. So what Rome has to contend with, much different than what Constantinople is dealing with.
Are there elements of Islam or anti-Islam sentiment today in the Eastern Orthodox culture?
I mean,
Flavor of it?
I mean, other than different religions, so certainly. Influence, I would say so, yeah. I don't know that we were talking doctrine so much as maybe just,
Flavor, cultural?
yeah, cultural. Yeah, well, yeah, like if you stopped in for the Coptic worship down here, I mean, if you didn't know better, other than maybe the Christian imagery aside, you would be like, wait, what's going on here? They're speaking Arabic. They're speaking. It's like it might, like a passerby would be like, oh, there's Islamic worship going on, because that's just what it would look like to them. So there's I would say some influence. Definitely not my area of expertise, so I don't want to say anything too much because I want to. Not that I'm afraid to put my foot in my mouth. I've done that plenty of times.
What does Coptic refer to?
Egyptian Christians. The church, one of the church councils misrepresented what they were saying, and so they got really upset and sort of left, or at least distanced themselves.
Do you know how many approximately Christians currently are in Egypt?
Yeah.
I don't know.
10%.
Oh, really?
In Alexandria, yeah.
Okay.
And they're getting Christians.
Let's see. Oof, man. So, real quick, talk about the Pope. So, the Pope, the papacy, the Pope, as a title, was the Bishop of Rome. So we've had, by this point, there's been a ton of popes. Okay, the papacy isn't quite in the Middle Ages is kind of when it starts to take shape to what we would recognize it as more today. The primacy of the Pope wasn't fully realized until Pope Innocent III, which was right around 1200. So that is the primacy being like he is the head of all things. It was kind of like leading up to that, it was being developed, and people were like, yes, of course, the bishop in Rome, he's our head authority. But that was like the appeal process would go from local to regional to Rome. So it was kind of de facto, the Bishop of Rome was that final authority. It wasn't really formalized until 1200. The interesting thing is that papal infallibility was actually, as far as an official thing, is very recent. There's some thought that maybe papal infallibility existed in this time, some idea about it. Reformation seems to, like, there's some definite feelings like, yes, the Pope, of course, when the Pope is speaking in his Pope capacity, well, of course, he's right. The doctrine of papal infallibility wasn't until 1870, interestingly enough. That's when it was, like, officially said in their doctrine, if the Pope is speaking from ex cathedra, from the throne of, from his official duties, he is infallible. Relatively recent officially. So you had a time where, so you look at how this papacy kind of, it grew and formed. Early on, the Pope was chosen by churchmen, the clergy. They kind of chose their own, they voted amongst themselves. The emperor would kind of bless it, but the church was in charge of selecting the Pope. Around this period, so 700 to 1100, give or take, now the Pope is kind of growing in stature so much that because Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne, the emperor of the Romans, well, now the Pope has the authority to kind of crown the emperor. So now it's like, ooh. Now the Pope is like, ooh, okay. So he's got additional duties here, and he's kind of way up there. So the church-state thing kind of blends. And then later on, you get the establishment of not just the clergy choose the Pope, but the cardinals choose the Pope, which, guess how you become a cardinal? The Pope. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure the Pope appoints the cardinals. So, there's definitely, as we go through this, there's definitely periods where you can say, like, Charlemagne, the Roman emperor. Holy Roman emperor. There's points where you can definitely see, like, okay, there's clearly, they're abusing things and all that. And we definitely look at that and we should acknowledge it. But we also should acknowledge that, when anybody gets any amount of power, guess what their first instinct is to do?
Get more power.
Get more power, abuse the hell out of it. I mean, it's ridiculous when you give even somebody a small amount of power. I mean, okay, perfect example. Like, the first time we left Caitlin alone with the other kids. Okay, we're going to have dinner. We're going to go get sushi. And so like, okay, Caitlin, you're in charge. And the eyes, oh no. I'm in charge. They have to do whatever I tell them to do. The most minimal amount of power. And you could already see like, ooh. And it's not, she was, the house didn't burn down. I'm sure it went fine. But the wheel, like, ooh, you mean I get to do whatever I want? Even, she just turned 18, like, wait, freedom? Authority? That's all of us. Sometimes I think like, it'd be fun to be one of those guys like in the district or in the synod to go out and do like speaking tours and to be that guy who like the churches want you to come and give a lecture. That would be kind of cool. And I think about that sometimes, and I'm like, no, because I know how I would get, and I'd get full of myself and be like, oh, all right, yeah, I'm hot stuff. Yeah, I'm in demand. It's definitely going to puff up my ego. And I'm not saying that I'm all of a sudden going to become, little evil dictator of the church here. But it's going to change the way it's going to have an influence. It's just how it is. You get more power, the desires to abuse it. What was I... When you start to like, okay, so the Pope elects the cardinals, and then the cardinals elect the Pope, and you say like, well, of course, that's set up horribly. Well, okay, let's say...
Is that how papal infallibility came about?
No, I don't think so.
He pronounced himself? I'm perfect.
No, that would be like the stereotypical, like the Pope is evil. Where it's like, Luther would say that the papacy is the Antichrist. So we'll get there when we get to Reformation. But, in this idea of there's a guy in charge, it's like, well, of course he's going to do things. He's not going to be great or perfect. No president we will ever have is going to be some paragon of virtue, altruistic, and the greatest guy who's going to do things for the people. Like, no. And no congressperson, no senator, no president. It's just, you give them that much power, it's going to corrupt them in some way, shape, or form. If I had, the ability, like, if we had a position at church, part-time position for something menial, whatever. Well, Christine's almost 16. Hey, I'll let her have the job. It's just doing some stuff around the church. Is that a problem?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Well, if the president or a senator or a congressperson has a plum job that pays a lot of money, is whatever, and they say, oh, here, I'm going to give it to my cousin. Is that a problem?
Nepotism.
Ooh, nepotism, yeah. And so it's like you have, I mean, the point is on a very small scale, we're like, it's no big deal. Whereas I would say like, well, no, Christine, she doesn't, I mean, we take care of her. It'd be better to give somebody who doesn't have a job, who needs that money to have that job. But hey, Christine's one of our people, you know? It's like, we want to promote from within, right? So it's like, and that's like you know, I want to do something, I want my family, you know, I want to give something, I'm supposed to take care of them. I want to do good there. And like, it's okay. It starts to get into like, well, is it? I don't know. Am I abusing my power? Am I giving special privileges to my family? Because, yeah.
When's Christine start?
Next week.
I think she'd be good at it.
Every secretary has been not from that church.
Oh, okay. Said every church she's been in, the secretary has not been of that church. That's, yeah.
And speaking from experience, my father gave me a job at 16, working under him. It was terrible. It was scarred me for life.
It's not always, you know, there's a reason why they say don't work with friends or family.
All that nepotism.
Well, yeah, and
It's not good for a kid.
it's not, it could be. I mean, there are exceptions to everything, but in general, yeah, I agree. It's not always great.
In that context, it was a different context. But it
Sure.
was a big organization.
My buddy who I went to seminary with, Eric Schmidt, he's a pastor at in Saginaw. Peace, right? Peace in Saginaw. I mean, we are like, you know, we have the same brain. Caitlin went up there sat in on one of their services or Bible studies. She's like, oh my gosh, you guys sound exactly the same. Like, yeah, we do. When I came up here, I assumed he was the one who got me up here. Like, he pulled some strings to get me to Michigan. He's like, it wasn't me. So there are times where we talk about like, oh, wouldn't it be great if like, because they have an associate pastor. It's like, you know, if that associate pastor left, you know, make me his associate and we can work together. Wouldn't that be awesome? Be like, God, that would be terrible. Be the worst thing ever. I'd have fun. He'd have fun. Nobody else would. But I mean, it'd be great. We'd be looking out for each other. We'd have a great time. Awesome. And honestly, somewhere back here, it'd be like, that'd be so cool. Thankfully, all this other stuff says, that's a terrible idea. But that's kind of what you see happen. So like, you know, and I don't know where the process where it's like, well, you know, these people elect the Pope and now it's the cardinals and well, the cardinals are appointed. And it's like, I'm not saying that it started with some nefarious thing like, ooh, if we do this, we can get our own guy in. What I would probably say is it probably started off with an idea like, you know what, this is going to save time and effort, and it's just going to be easier if we do it this way, which is usually the way most things start. Like, you know what, let's just simplify the process. Let's keep it all in-house. It'll be better. And it like works sort of for a few times, and then you space it out a couple hundred years, and all of a sudden people are like, whoa! Like, well, yeah, you created a horrible system, and you didn't have foresight to see how this could possibly be a problem. You know, this is why we have church councils. This is why when I have thank God Paul is here throughout the week when I get some dumb idea of something I want to do or I think would be a great idea, and I say, hey. I've done this a few times, like, hey, I've been thinking about this. And Paul says, like, you should probably ask some people about that. Like, you should probably talk to those people. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. And I talk to those people, and they're like, that's a terrible idea. We tried that. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. But I mean, like, people to bounce stuff off of, because I'm in power here. You guys are great, because you do give me free reign to do a lot of stuff. Maybe not free reign, latitude. You give me some space. But I don't exercise that. I don't do crazy things. I don't go out and like, hey, I used our church credit card to buy a van because I figured the church needed a church van.
Good idea.
I could, I suppose, if I could put that much on the credit card.
You've been there and done
Yeah.
that.
Well, but I mean, and the way we've structured the governance of our church is that I can't do that. Thank God. Not that I would, but if I got a wild hair and I thought, hey, this could actually serve the gospel, and I know better than you because I went to seminary and blah, 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 I could just bull right through and do it.
You would pay for it in the end,
Oh, yes.
because you're being watched closer than we are.
Oh,
You know who.
Oh, I assume everything is being watched, so I'm just like, you know what, I try to be safe. But the point is that just once you get authority, power, it just draws corruption. I mean, at the very least, you start to, entertain things that maybe you wouldn't entertain otherwise. So you see that going on. So that's going on and on the high level of the church. So it's like, okay, we've got a situation where it's not great, and there's some potential abuses, groundwork being laid. Okay, there's that. You've got on the lower level, you've got bishops who, they could be influenced by the landowners, they can be influenced by the king. So there's that, but some of them are doing fine. You've got all this stuff going on. And the fun thing is that when it comes to historical records of that time in the church, like how we view, and where I'm going with this is our view is oftentimes that the church was very corrupt at this time. It was very corrupt, and they were all about was money and all this stuff. The historical records of the church we have at that time are primarily they reflect all the violations of canon law and Christian ethics. So anytime anybody got in trouble, it was recorded. That's most of what we have. So basically, that's us reconstructing what happened during this time based off of police reports. So how do you think we're going to view most of it? Pretty negatively. So even though the possibility for abuse and the examples of abuse were there was a lot of good going on too. It wasn't everywhere. Okay, are there abuses in the American Christian church? Yes. Good Lord, is that everywhere? I mean, not everywhere. I mean, I think we're pretty good. It's not like the whole American Christian church is not just a stinking pile. Corners of it, little pockets here and there. We're over time. Boy, we barely got into anything.
Question.
Yeah.
When you said the church historical records of the time showed pretty much just violations of who got in trouble with canonical law, was it the people in authority or was it people in congregations?
Anywhere. I mean, whatever.
So
Yes.
if I went out and vandalized, that would have gone into canonical law.
Potential. Yeah. Possible. Not necessarily, but I mean, it's possible. Certainly in the higher levels would have been recorded. Because, you've got issues of confession and whatnot. But part of the thing is also that, so the church, who was it? We didn't even talk about money. That was a huge thing. Okay. Give me a few minutes. Back to Constantine. Okay, way back when. So very foundation, right? He decreed that, like, if you were tried in the civil court for a crime, you had the option to move that trial to the church court. Whether or not you were already a verdict or whatever, you could move it to the church court, but the church court had the final say. So whatever the church court said, that stood. That was where it was going to go. The bishop's verdict was final. So he started this kind of framework of moving some civil judgment into the church realm. All right, well, barbarian invasion, right? Barbarians come in, make a mess of things. Oftentimes when the barbarians would come through and do their thing, the only kind of institution standing would be the church. So the only way to deal with justice and civil affairs in some times and regions was to go through the church. All right. So by 1100, a large chunk of the population was under the jurisdiction of the church. Now, again, this is not the church saying, we want to control people's lives. It was just like, this is how it turned out. Constantine made a decree that maybe wasn't well thought out. And when the situation, the context, and what the flow of history just made it so that, you know what? The church courts were sometimes the only ones. And church courts were very popular. Why would you think?
Mercy.
Yes! Civil court, stringent. If you were guilty, you were, like, no, you did that? Done. Somebody saw you do it, you're done. The church court takes into motivation, your whatever, circumstances, whatever. They would have mercy. Like, your intention wasn't to hurt. So you might have done that, but you didn't mean it. And you have a character witness, okay, mercy. So the church, so people like, I'd rather have my case tried in a church because, depending on who you get, the right bishop. So again, just the way things go, it has a potential for not being great. The fun thing about church courts were you were guilty until proven innocent. So there was that, which might be due to we're all sinful, right? We're all sinners. So prove to me that you're innocent. You could bring on character witnesses to say that you're a good person and be like, okay, that would work. You could make an appeal to the higher court. The fun thing was the church officially here, these were fun. Have you ever heard of these? Trial by ordeal?
That was after the Reformation.
Oh, no.
Witch trials and stuff like that?
Well, you see that later on, but it started a lot earlier. And it wasn't a Christian thing. I mean, it was like pagan kind of influence. And the church kind of officially said, no, we don't do that. The church kind of allowed it. In some places and sometimes the church was like, yeah, okay. So basically what these were like, you had to walk, from here to there holding some hot coals. You had to reach into a cauldron with a boiling oil and pull out a rock. And the idea is if that, whatever hurt, if it healed without infection, that meant you were innocent. Because God looks out for you. You were innocent. Because God would not allow the innocent to suffer. Now, the fun thing was also, and another variation of it was throw you into some water. Because, the idea is water is purifying. Water expels impurities. But here's the kicker. If you floated, you were guilty. If you sunk, you were innocent.
Get rid of you either way.
Which is like, it's a Monty Python sketch, Go watch Holy Grail, and it's the whole she's a witch scene. It's like, throw into the water. It's wood floats, yeah. If she weighs the same as a duck, she's made of wood. And therefore she floats, therefore she's a witch. I mean, it's great because Monty Python actually kind of nailed it. Unknowingly, or maybe knowingly.
That's like being drugged.
So they were later abolished
You're innocent.
by the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215. So in 1215, the church finally said, okay, guys, we told you before we weren't allowing it, even though we did, but now cut it out. So there were times where they were like, they tried to, this stuff crept in, and it was bad. And the church kind of like, stop it, guys. And then later, we're like, okay, really, stop it. We're done messing around. Okay, Matt has a comment here. Many cases, the higher-ups officially disapproving of things being done locally. Witch hunts were my thing studying history in college. So when we get to witch hunts, we're going to get Matt in here, and he's going to lead us. But I mean, it's the same kind of principle as these trial by ordeal kind of things. Yeah, it gets real fun, and especially like money. We didn't talk about money, but the church. By the late Middle Ages, the Church of Rome, the papacy, was a feudal lord of almost a third of Italy. So you can imagine if money centered around your land holdings, the papacy was making some good money. Churches that had property would get money. Church was supported by offerings, tithes. And often people say, oh yeah, that time the church was all about money and getting money out of the people. It was very hard to get money from people back then. There are stories about bishops and priests getting beaten and killed when they were trying to collect the offering. It wasn't a guarantee that the church was getting their money, even from like the understood like, hey, here's the offering that's expected, not even going above and beyond. So, and money was given for certain things, the pastoral services. There were fees for that. There were all these fees attached to stuff. And it was kind of normal at first. Then, honestly, as we get closer to this time, when capitalism kind of shifts, inflation kind of goes crazy, money gets tight, well, the churches need to have more fees on stuff. And so here's where you start to see where, this focus on money, and it wasn't necessarily like, ooh, they're money hungry. Like, well, they actually had some issues getting money before, and they were at points trying to survive. But then this also led into quite a bit of abuse later on. And even at this time, there were a lot of people in the church saying, hey, why is the church so focused on money? And this will become a bigger issue in the Reformation. But, like the... there were a lot of... So, like, when a bishop died, so a bishop received an income, through the affairs of the church, whatever. So a bishop received an income. If a bishop died, so like say you're a king or a lord of an area, and the bishop is in your area, if the bishop dies, all of his income starts coming to me until a new one is appointed. Where's my incentive to get a new bishop in? So not only do I not have an incentive to get a new bishop in, but I can say, hey, I want this guy. And I'm going to tell him, okay, give me half. Because I can control it to a degree. So, there was definitely clergy abuse. There was clergy kind of doing things they shouldn't have doing and taking a little bit extra. There was a lot of abuse of the clergy, too. It wasn't just a straight kind of shot. There was abuse going all over the place. Basically, it was human beings being human beings. It's just kind of how it works. We want to get away with, going back to the cheating on your taxes thing. Nobody wants to cheat on their taxes. But, maybe not say everything. Like, well, maybe I'll bump this number a little bit. I mean, that'll help a little bit. There's always little ways that you kind of game the system. And there's always the desire to do that, or the impetus, whatever you want to call it, temptation. It was a mess. But I mean, it's always been a mess. Hopefully, in my scattershot way, we're starting to see how, there was a lot of stuff happening, but I mean, they were reacting to a lot of different things. I mean, it was a time of a lot of change. Things were happening fast. And remember, in the back of this, you got Islam spreading like crazy. So not only in the West are they dealing with this new system, the Roman Empire has fallen, a new system of doing things. You've got tribal situations. Everyone's this different tribe. You've got Islam going over here. You've got the East. I don't know what they're doing anymore. And now we're trying to survive and grow the church. And honestly, it's like, what do you do? And at this point, they're like, you know what? We're just going to try to get people to, we just want them to get we're not even teaching them Christianity necessarily. We're not teaching them doctrine. We're just trying to get them in the door. We'll teach them later. So and it's not like they don't care about teaching. It's just like we have to survive. And there's a lot of pressures coming from all over. And yeah, when things go well, there's abuse. When things go badly, there's abuse. There's always abuse. Any questions? All right. Maybe next time we'll get to another council. Saint Benedict, that's some fun stuff. Ooh. Okay, one last thing. Because this is fun. Talking about monasticism. Here's my little way to show you that not much changes. Where was it? Okay. So, we see a lot of the same abuses going on there that we probably see around the church today, right? Remember, I think when we first started, we talked about, there's even in Lutheranism, there's been a divide between, this was a big thing, has been for a while, between confessionalism and missionalism. You're either a confessional Lutheran or you're a missional Lutheran. This confessionalism, or if you're a confessional Lutheran, that means the stereotype is you're focused solely on the confessions, the doctrinal statements of Lutheranism. All you care about is doctrine and getting, pure doctrine. If you get the pure doctrine, you're good. Confessions, that's where it's at. We need to teach the confessions to everybody so they understand fully what a Lutheran believes. Okay? Missional types say, love and serve your neighbor. That the best way to go about spreading the gospel is taking it out to people. Missional is out there. You take the gospel out, you love and serve your neighbor, you bring it to the people, you live, in service to your neighbor. That's what it's all about. There's been an argument for the last 20 years between these two groups.
And it should be a balance.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's both of these together, but nobody ever talks that way. Because it's more fun to take sides and argue, because again, Lutherans. So we've looked at this for the past, 20 years. Like this has been the big discussion, the divide between this. What we didn't get into tonight was talking about monasticism. And as it starts to grow and change over in the Middle Ages, ascetics, people who live an ascetic lifestyle, so monks, who abandon the world, there starts to be two kinds of ascetics that kind of take shape. One, contemplatives and actives. Contemplatives serve God through prayer and worship. Actives serve God through serving their neighbor. It's the same crap the church has been dealing with for over 1,000 years. And we're still like, ugh. So unfortunately, and this is why I think it's good to study this stuff, is because the same stuff that was happening is the same stuff we're dealing with now. It looks different. It's the same. Yeah, they were having the same stupid argument back then. They're like, no, it's just about worship and prayer. No, you gotta love and serve people. Meanwhile, I've got Lutherans being like, no, confessions, no, be the church. It's like, oh my God, shut up, everybody. Again, go over there, we're gonna do our thing. Leave us alone.
How do you get them to change it?
How do you get them to change it?
Wait till one,
You start a new church.
one faction dies off or something.
You pick your battles and you just don't engage in, you don't join any Facebook
I've
groups.
never heard of that.
Don't join any Facebook groups and don't get sucked into conversations about it.
Why can't they be merged and do both? I mean, because you're.
Because you can't have both. Honest to God, I don't know why it was ever a
I mean,
thing.
it just seems like if they combine. their-
Well, it's because neither one of these. Okay, so I think basically what these people say is if you get your pure doctrine right, the love and service flows from this. Whereas these people say if you get the love and service right, then that the doctrine, they'll come around the doctrine. They'll want to know more, and so you teach them. So it's like honestly, the idiots on both sides are like they're arguing, just saying like the same sort of thing, but like, well, our way's better. No, our way's better. It's like,
Well,
oh.
now they're gonna be called something different because.
Oh, I've got a
they're
few.
gonna go
I've got a
together.
few names for them, but I'm not. I won't write them down. I'll tell you after we go off the stream. It's both. It's. But, and then we'll talk.
Well,
About it.
I like to pray and I also like to love and help.
Heretic. No.
No.
Yeah, yeah. We'll throw you in some water, see if you float or sink. Then we'll decide if you're right or not.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was good. All right. Pietists versus scholastic. Oh God, yeah. We'll get there, buddy. We'll get there. Oh, Matt Meyerhuber. He's got a lot of good Lutheran background, and so he's pulling out stuff where it's like, oh, don't go there. I'm not ready to go there yet. But yes, we'll get there. All right. Thank you. I hope this was good tonight. I don't know. I didn't get through half of what I wanted to, but I think it was good. We had good pie. Thank you.
That's good.
Yeah,
Starting with-
All right.
Good
See you next
pie.
week.